mysterious computer crash pushes a thriving manufacturing company to the brink of collapse, jeopardizing the jobs of dozens of employees. There is no apparent cause, no obvious clues. Forensic investigators had to find out whether the disaster was caused by a computer defect, human error, or sabotage. Today, there are over 700 million computers at work in the world. Any one of those holds millions of records vital to people, governments, and industries. But millions of pieces of information in one small box can make that information vulnerable. Omega Engineering manufactured high-tech measurement devices for the United States Navy, NASA, and clients around the world. A state-of-the-art computer system at their New Jersey plant enabled Omega to quickly customize their products to suit their customers' needs. The business was growing, and revenues were up. Then came July 31st, 1996.
It was a bad day at Omega on July 31st of 96. One of their workers got in about 8:30 in the morning, went to his or her workstation like they always did, and they flipped on the system. They booted up the computer. And instead of coming on, though, it said fixing. And the worker didn't know what was going on, but fixing sounded pretty positive, so he let it run. And within seconds, the machine was down.
But it wasn't that one machine that was in trouble. The manufacturing equipment at Omega got its instructions from the computer server, the brains of a sophisticated system that could store over 1,000 different programs.
Those 1,000 programs built 25,000 different products, and they could customize those products into 500,000 different pieces. So you're talking about everything that the company could make.
But now, in the span of just a few seconds, Omega's vital computer system had crashed. The plant's manager tried to get the server up and running again, with no luck. Typically, crucial files are periodically copied from a server onto a backup tape. Omega thought they could restore the missing programs from their backup.
And the backup tape was kept in a filing cabinet in the Human Resources office.
But the tape wasn't there. With no computer programs to drive the manufacturing process, plant operators had only one option: to complete the jobs that had already been started before the crash.
Just to keep the machines running, to keep producing, to keep people working. They just kept producing until they ran out of raw materials.
But they ultimately created such a vast inventory of those specific items that they couldn't justify continuing anymore, so they had to shut the plant down.
One big problem that Omega had was that they hadn't hired a new network administrator.
The former network administrator, a longtime employee named Tim Lloyd, was now working for another company.
He was the one who actually built the network in the Omega South plant. He was the genesis of their whole network. He knew it inside and out. He built it.
He was the designer for all the computer programming. He was the overseer of their network.
The plant manager, Jim Ferguson, called Lloyd to see if he could help solve the serious problem with Omega's computer system.
Did you come across any, you mentioned that you might want to look in you were going to look in the basement for some old tapes, some backup tapes?
Still looking.
Okay. Was there one tape or two tapes of backups?
There was one tape that was in the filing cabinet.
Right.
Omega was teetering on the brink of collapse, with hundreds of jobs at stake and no clues about what had caused the catastrophic shutdown of the computers. Omega Engineering faced a crisis so immense it could force the company out of business. 2 weeks earlier, the computer system that contained the plans for all their products had inexplicably crashed. Time was running out. If Omega couldn't get its computer system back up, layoffs would be inevitable.
What they lost was the ability to manufacture. And when you're a manufacturing company, you're dead in the water.
Omega hired Kroll On Track, a Minnesota-based company that resurrects data from crashed computers all over the world.
Any kind of media that actually you store data onto, anytime they lose access to this or for some reason becomes unreadable, we get involved to help restore the data.
Bob Hackett, a computer forensic expert, began by examining the hard drive on Omega's server. The drive was physically undamaged. But retrieving the data would mean examining the electronic contents that might reveal important evidence. But Omega management now wondered if the crash might have been sabotage. So to safeguard the hard drive, they turned it over to the Secret Service. Experts in computer fraud, the Secret Service knew hunting for the lost programs might alter records on the drive. Even just turning on a computer alters or overwrites some of the information.
From a forensic standpoint, you don't want to write to that hard drive.
The Secret Service made an exact digital replica of Omega's hard drive, a clone that enabled OnTrack to examine all the data stored in the original. What OnTrack investigators discovered was startling. All that remained was fragmented computer code, mostly unintelligible even to computer experts. This indicated the programs had not been simply deleted. Deleting a computer file erases only the name of the file. The data actually remains in the computer's memory until it is replaced by something else, so it's often possible to recover the information. But in this case, investigators discovered that Omega's programs had not only been deleted, they had also been purged.
If we take the analogy of a piece of paper on a desk, if I was to take that, crumple it up, and throw it in the wastebasket, that would be equivalent to a deletion on a computer system. I could still go grab that piece of paper out of the garbage can, unfold it, and look at it. A purge would take that same piece of paper, run it through a shredder, take what came out through the shredder, throw it up in the air.
Omega's data could never be recovered. The focus now shifted to a forensic investigation into how and why the data was purged. Greg Olson, an expert in the operating system used by Omega, examined the drive for signs of a virus. A virus corrupts data by inserting its own code into whatever program is being run.
There are no viruses that would cause this particular damage.
User error was another possibility, an accidental deletion.
Very common, we find that system administrators come in and reinstalled an operating system or made a mistake by reformatting a hard drive. And I was able to rule that out effectively by looking at the system, that clearly that did not happen.
Because the deletion was too surgical to be accidental. Only the key manufacturing programs had been destroyed. If it was intentional, it could mean it was an inside job.
It's not going to be some kid home alone after school who just randomly breaks into Omega's system and knows where those specific files are. You need someone who's on the inside, someone who knows where the keys to the castle are hidden, and they know how to hurt the company.
The Secret Service first looked at Tim Lloyd, the man who had designed Omega's computer system. He had recently left Omega for a job at another company. Supervisors had given him a positive reference.
They said he was a good worker. They said that he was excellent technically. They didn't want to prevent him from getting another job.
Lloyd had left Omega 3 weeks before the computer crash, so he didn't have access to the building to purge the manufacturing programs on the day of the crash.
They thought maybe he hacked in from the outside, but they said that they had disconnected any contact from an outside modem, so they knew that couldn't have been done.
Only supervisors had access to Omega's computer system at a level necessary to cause this much damage. But there was a problem.
Just about everybody had supervisory rights, and there were even some accounts that were set up with a name like 12345 with absolutely no password. So there was no security on this.
Which meant that the perpetrator could have been anyone. 6 months after the massive computer crash, Omega was struggling to stay afloat. How had its proprietary software been completely deleted? Troll OnTrack's Greg Olson, an expert in the Novell operating system that controlled the server, sifted the electronic flotsam of the company's hard drive.
The problem is when you do a delete and a purge, the entire roadmap to know where this data is completely gone. So it's literally a needle in the haystack and impossible to piece this information together. All you're seeing is a collection of letters and numbers that don't really mean anything.
Olson relied on sophisticated software to help him search for any suspicious commands.
What I'm looking for is bits of code that I know in the computer world cause deletion. In this particular case, what I was zeroing in on was any type of a delete or even any type of a purge.
Eventually, Olson found a purge command tied to 5 other lines of code. It was a dangerously efficient bit of programming.
We called it a time bomb, and the actual fuse was 6 lines of code. And what it was is really a set of steps that the computer would go through, some checks.
The first line simply checked the date and compared it to July 30th, 1996, the day before the server crash.
This fuse can be attached to anybody that's logging in. So when you come in, what the fuse does is it checks the date. And if it's after the date in the fuse, it would actually light the time bomb to actually do the deletion.
The second line of code accessed the server. The third line was a logon command for the mysterious user 12345, a kind of computer ghost. The unsuspecting user and 12345 were logged in on the same machine. But 12345 provided the supervisory status needed to perform deletions. The next line accessed the manufacturing programs. The fifth line launched a program labeled fix.exe. When Olson looked at the code for this program, he found a troubling clue. The code had been generated from a commonly available deletion program, but it had been reconfigured to fool anyone using the system.
It did modify the intention of deletion, but the message that appears on the screen that would normally say deleting this file, actually said fixing this file, fixing this file.
The code was also rewritten to ignore safeguards, automatically answering yes to the question, "Are you sure you want to delete these files?" The last line of code was the purge command, making the material unrecoverable.
It would happen relatively fast. You could go get a cup of coffee, read the front page of the paper, and come back and it's all done. It's all gone.
And all the user had to do was turn on the computer. But Olson and Hackett found other purge commands as well. 3 similar sets of code dated for February, April, and May. But they only deleted a useless test folder, which would have gone undetected by the company.
What I deduced from that is essentially somebody was doing some testing of the application, this particular time bomb, to make sure that it would work before it was truly implemented and ready to go.
It appeared the tests were done while Omega's former computer manager, Tim Lloyd, was still at the company. The Secret Service ran a background check and learned that Lloyd had been disciplined for run-ins with co-workers shortly before leaving the company.
There was conflict that broke out between other employees, between management, between supervisors.
He would bottleneck projects just because he wasn't in charge of the projects, that he hadn't tested projects before they went into production, and so there were a lot of problems. One person even testified that he had elbowed a female coworker in the workplace.
On August 21st, Secret Service agents searched Lloyd's home and garage, looking for evidence to tie him to the malicious code. They found circuit boards, computers, more than 500 disks, several hard drives, and data tapes. What immediately stuck out was a tape labeled Backup, with the dates May 14, 1996 and July 1st, 1996. Authorities suspected it was the missing backup tape from Omega, but it was blank.
We learned that the backup tape had been reformatted or essentially erased a matter of days before the search warrant was executed. The next thing we had to do was try to establish additional evidence that would support our theory that Lloyd was the guy. So what we did was, for example, we went to his time cards.
Lloyd's time card showed that he worked late on days in February, April, and May, each time just prior to the test runs of the time bomb. Then Hackett and Olson found a copy of the time bomb on one of Lloyd's hard drives.
So the same lines of code that OnTrack had pieced together from the downed server, they found those lines intact in Tim's home.
A relatively new statute made computer sabotage a federal offense if it affected a computer used in interstate commerce and caused more than $5,000 worth of damage. Tim Lloyd was indicted by a grand jury. His case would be the first test of the new law. Prosecutors in New Jersey say the computer crash devastated Omega Engineering, leading to $10 million of lost business, $2 million of reprogramming costs, and 80 employee layoffs.
Probably would have done less damage to the company if he had done it with a real bomb.
It doesn't matter really what happens to the building if your data is gone.
It is a white-collar crime, but it's a very serious crime. It's a nonviolent crime, but you know what? You don't know what the implications are of people losing their jobs.
Timothy Lloyd's 4-week trial began in April 1998. It would be one of the first criminal cases to explore the arcane world of computer code.
How would an attorney who hadn't before this had a lot of technical expertise go into a really high-tech field and explain it to a jury?
At trial, prosecutors argued that Lloyd had fallen out of favor with his supervisors and grown resentful when he was reassigned. Investigators had been able to prove that Lloyd developed the time bomb code at home, then worked late so that he could install and test the code in secret. He planned on quitting and was in the process of interviewing with another company when he was fired. In fact, he told a recruiter at his new company that everybody's job at Omega is in jeopardy. He made the remark on July 31st, the same day the computer crashed.
How would he know that? On the day that that time bomb, nobody even at Omega knew that. They thought they had a computer problem. That's all they knew. But everybody's job, I think that was a remarkable find and something that the jurors were able to pick up on.
But the most compelling evidence was the bits of code the computer experts found.
We were able to find a hard drive in his house that had that command on it. Had we not found that, then he would have gotten away with it.
The jury found Lloyd guilty. Various appeals kept him free for almost 4 years. But in 2002, he began serving a prison term of 3.5 years and ordered to pay $2 million in restitution. Lloyd claims he is innocent and that someone at Omega accidentally deleted the programs. He says he could have proved that at trial, but his attorney advised him not to take the stand.
He's the consummate egotist. I think he is absolutely livid that he was discovered. I think that there was a point in time when he was actually prepared to say, I found it and I'll ride to the rescue. But I think when Ferguson says we're bringing in the Secret Service.
We're at a very, very serious stage. We're actually bringing in the federal authorities at this point.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit.
Yeah.
I think that that changed his mind.
Omega Engineering never fully recovered, but is still in business. Kroll on Track was given an award by the Secret Service for the unique role they played in a case that paved new legal ground.
It was interesting simply because it was one of the first cases of its type, that we had seen.
Omega made a lot of technical mistakes, but their biggest mistakes were caused by human factors. It was because they trusted Tim. It was because they had real affection for Tim, and they thought that he was family. And you let family get away with a lot more than you would anybody else. You give them a lot more rope to hang themselves with.
A massive hurricane forced the evacuation of North Carolina's Outer Banks. Some of the evacuees were suspects in a murder investigation, and police had to find some way to get them back. The Outer Banks of North Carolina is one of America's favorite getaway destinations. Nearly 7 million people visit these beaches every year.
The beaches are very nice, lots of good restaurants, real family-oriented place.
In 1993, Janet Siclari came to Nags Head, North Carolina for a week's vacation, along with her brother Robert and several friends. Janet was 35 years old and had recently broken up with her boyfriend.
Janet had a previous 10-year relationship with someone. It just never was totally right for her. It had to be perfect. And she never found the Mr. Perfect that she was looking for.
On their last evening in town, Janet went to dinner with her 2 girlfriends. Later, they went to a nearby nightclub.
The girls decided that they wanted to get home. They were tired, and they wanted to pack up. Janet was still having fun and was partying, so they left her with the car because she was going to be basically by herself, and they knew that she would be easier to drive back while they walked together.
At dawn the next morning, a sanitation worker found Janet's body on the beach, just 10 yards from the front of her hotel.
She was only wearing a blue denim top with no clothing below the waist, and she was clutching a pair of white denim shorts to her neck area.
A rape test kit proved Janet had been sexually assaulted. Next to Janet's body was a pair of men's size 9 tennis shoes with gray socks inside.
It was very odd that there was this rape and murder on the beach and this pair of shoes within 30 feet of the body. This was just sort of a bizarre fact to me. And we had always been suspicious that they were connected. It was too coincidental.
Police decided not to release the cause of death to the media, so if a suspect knew how she was killed, there would be only one way he'd know that. Janet had been sharing a hotel room with her brother Robert. He told police Janet got back around 2:30 in the morning.
Robert was asleep when he heard her come in the room. She came in, he said, lit a cigarette and put her purse down and said something like, I'm just going to go out and smoke this cigarette, and walked right out the door.
Robert said he was barely awake, but thought Janet might have been with friends.
He thought that he heard some voices outside the door, some whispering, and thought that perhaps Janet was with someone else. He wasn't real clear on this ever in his statements.
Unfortunately, none of the hotel employees saw Janet enter or leave the hotel.
That room was at the end of a hall that faced the ocean, and right outside their door was a doorway and a set of stairs that led out and down to the deck and right to the ocean. So she didn't have to go back through the lobby to get out of the hotel to go to the ocean.
Police now had to search for witnesses, anyone who might have been in the general area around 3 o'clock in the morning. And in a vacation community, that wouldn't be easy. No one, neither family nor investigators, could make sense of Janet Siclari's murder.
This was a horrific crime. This was a stranger sexual assault and murder. And if there is any other crime that's more horrific than that, I don't know what it is.
Things like this don't happen to people who live their life honestly and decently. They just don't.
Carolinian was a relatively large hotel that went north and south for some 100 feet. It would have been a sound barrier that would have prevented anything probably that had occurred on the beach except some loud firework type sound or a gunshot to have been heard.
Police attempted to retrace Janet's steps on the day of her murder. According to her 2 girlfriends, Janet spent time in the afternoon with the hotel's bartender, Reed Powell, and they immediately hit it off.
They were talking to each other. Janet was flirting a little bit, I think, with Reed. He was quiet and he was shy, which was probably very attractive to Janet.
Later that evening, Janet and her friends ran into Reed at the Portico bar. Reed was there with his girlfriend, but he had gotten into a fight.
While Reed was at the Portico, he saw his girlfriend dancing with another gentleman and got a little bit upset about that. And there was a slight altercation as a result.
When Janet's friends went back to the hotel, Janet stayed behind to talk to Reed. They left the bar at closing time around 2 a.m.
So he stated that he was going to take a cab. And at that point, Janet told him there was no sense in that she would give him a ride since she was going right by his house to go back to the hotel.
When questioned, Reed Powell told police that after Janet dropped him off at home, he got the keys to his car and went looking for his girlfriend to patch things up.
His girlfriend was an employee of the Carolinian, and they had apartments there for employees.
The Carolinian was also where Janet Siclari was staying.
Reed drove to the Carolinian Hotel, and while waiting there for his girlfriend in the parking lot, he observed Janet arrive at the hotel and go inside by herself.
Reed said he didn't speak with Janet at the time. He eventually saw his girlfriend when she returned to the hotel.
They got into a verbal argument, and he ended up slapping her across the face. That pretty much ended the conversation. His girlfriend went on to her apartment, and he went back to his apartment.
When police asked Reed what he was doing while waiting for his girlfriend, he made a shocking revelation.
He had gotten hungry and carried with him a steak knife and a stick of pepperoni and sat in the car as he was waiting for his girlfriend to return.
This was a valuable piece of information and possibly incriminating. Janet had been stabbed to death on the beach that night, but police didn't release this information to the public. Reed Powell admitted he was sitting just 100 yards away from where Janet was murdered with a knife in his hand.
Reed Powell was a very prime suspect in the investigation. They had had interactions that day indicating something more than just a friendship or just an acquaintance type relationship. So all of this was very much a concern of ours and led us to look at him very closely.
The investigation of Janet Siclari's murder was just 1 day old when Mother Nature provided an unexpected setback. Hurricane Emily, a Category 3 storm, was bearing down on the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
The whole island was completely turned upside down by a mandatory evacuation caused by a hurricane that did significant damage to the island. So we lost the crime scene, and we thought, where we were worried that we were losing witnesses.
Approximately 80,000 people evacuated the area, but the prime suspect, Reed Powell, stayed in town.
There was only one person that we thought could be a suspect, and that was Reed. He was the only person that we had talked to extensively that week and allowed into our little circle.
Police searched Reed's home and confiscated several steak knives.
The steak knives were submitted to the laboratory to look for the presence of blood on them. However, none of them demonstrated any indications for the presence of blood.
Investigators also took a sample of Reed's DNA. At the time, in 1993, DNA testing wasn't as advanced as it is today. The method at the time was to compare the length and patterns of autorads, which looked very much like barcode.
We compared the DNA profile from it to the DNA profile from the vaginal swabs, and it was very easy to determine that it was not a match.
I think we were all somewhat surprised that this was not a match.
Police discovered there were 10 other men who were either in the vicinity of the murder or had some contact with Janet the week of her vacation. All were asked to provide a DNA sample.
I examined them and their DNA standards and compared them to the DNA profile obtained from the sperm cells. Every single one of them was eliminated in this case.
It began to look like the perpetrator had already left the area, either because his vacation was over or because of the mandatory evacuation.
At that point in my career, I'd never had a case of this significance that we were not able to solve. So it was extremely frustrating and extremely heartbreaking.
Months stretched into years, and the case turned cold. But during that period of time, the FBI developed a way for every state to access the DNA profiles collected in other states. At the time, not every state collected DNA samples from convicted felons. But for the majority that did, this new system was a godsend, and they called the database CODIS, or Combined DNA Indexing System. So, in 1997, almost 5 years after Janet Siclari's murder, North Carolina officials entered the killer's DNA profile into the CODIS system. And they got a match. Amazingly, it matched someone living just an hour away in the same state of North Carolina.
This was our first, what we call first cold hit of a unsolved murder homicide, no suspect. And this was the first cold hit the state had ever had.
The DNA matched 32-year-old Thomas Jabin Berry, a commercial fisherman and convicted sex offender. One of those convictions was for an assault on a 12-year-old girl. Berry claims he was innocent of that charge.
She wasn't 12, she was 14. I got the paperwork in there. But or she was 13 going on 14 or something like that. But no, it was all consensual.
She was 12 years old. She was a kid.
When police caught up with Berry, he was in prison for a parole violation. Investigators showed him photographs of Janet Siclari and asked if he'd ever seen her. At first, he claimed he hadn't, but in a subsequent interview, he said he vaguely recalled her.
I had to have had sex with Janet. I mean, that's obvious from the DNA, but it would have been consensual, and there was no... I would have never killed nobody. I'd never kill anybody.
For him to say he had consensual sex with Janet is untruthful. It's a lie. I think the evidence shows that what happened was a rape and a homicide.
We were dealing with two crimes here. One was a rape and one was a murder. And while the evidence of DNA, we felt like went very strongly towards prosecuting a person for the rape of Janet Siclari, that wasn't conclusive evidence of a murder.
For more evidence, investigators had to look at the shoes found next to Janet's body. And inside, they found a huge surprise. The prime suspect in Janet Siclari's murder was Thomas Jabin Berry. He admitted he was in Nag's Head at the time, but he claimed any contact he had with Janet was consensual.
And I had sex with a lot of people on the beach. I wouldn't have had any idea, if we met that way and then just started walking and talking and one thing led to another. I've had that happen several times in my life. As a matter of fact, my first wife and I met that way.
But a look at Berry's background revealed his sexual history was far from innocent.
There were approximately a dozen other victims of sexual assault by Mr. Berry. We found one incident where he actually raped a young lady on the beach.
As for the night of the murder, Berry admitted he was on drugs.
I think Berry had been on the beach that night somewhere, partying, drinking, and doing crack. He admitted in his statements that that period of time, he was high on crack a lot.
To Janet Siclari's friends and family, the possibility of her having sex with a complete stranger was totally out of character.
She wasn't one to have a casual fling or an affair with someone. She was looking for something really sturdy in her life at 35 years old, a nice, good relationship.
But prosecutors didn't have to convince Janet's friends. They had to convince a jury. In an attempt to find something besides the DNA that tied Berry to the murder, detectives turned to the only other evidence at the crime scene, the tennis shoes. Berry denied the shoes were his.
The only way we could think to do that was to find someone who could do shoe impressions to see if there was a way to say, like a fingerprint, except with a foot in a shoe.
Investigators contacted Robert Kennedy, a forensic expert with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He had an international reputation for using barefoot impressions, particularly on the inside of shoes, as evidence.
I became involved with the barefoot research back in 1989. And as a result of a serial killer back in New Brunswick, we needed to see if the suspect's barefoot impression would match the impressions found inside of the shoe.
Kennedy soon established a database of these impressions and did a detailed study of how they're made.
When somebody wears a pair of shoes, the foot generates a large amount of heat inside of the shoe, so the foot will sweat. The weight-bearing area of the foot will cause indentation on the insole of the shoe. So you have a combination of slight indentations, sweat, dirty, darkened marks inside of the shoe.
These marks are unique to an individual's feet and therefore provide a potential basis for comparison. Kennedy got inked impressions on the bottoms of Thomas Berry's bare feet. Then he cut out the insoles of the shoes from the crime scene and photographed the surfaces. The images were overlaid for comparison.
There was no dissimilarities between the impression that Thomas Berry would make and the Spalding running shoe, so I was able to form a conclusion that Thomas Berry was the likely wearer of the Spalding running shoes.
To law enforcement, this placed Berry at the crime scene with the body. Prosecutors believe Janet gave Reed Powell a ride home from the bar, then went to her hotel. They believe her brother was mistaken when he said he heard voices coming from outside the room. Janet went back outside to smoke a cigarette. By tragic coincidence, Janet ran into Thomas Jabin Berry, a man with a history of sexual violence. He was also high on drugs. Prosecutors believe he used a knife to force Janet to have sex. Then he stabbed her to death so she couldn't identify him. Some in law enforcement think Berry left his shoes on the beach, so his shoe impressions wouldn't lead investigators back to his aunt's house near the hotel, where they think Berry spent the night.
In the end, Thomas Jabin Berry was the one who did himself in. If he had not violated the conditions of his parole, his sample would never have been available for us to analyze.
During Berry's murder trial, prosecutors learned an unfortunate piece of information.
He was back in the holding cell during the trial, and he made a comment to a jailer, "They'll never sentence me to death." And the jailer said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, there's somebody on the jury. She's good friends with my mama. She watched me grow up."
The jury convicted Thomas Jabin Berry of rape and first-degree murder. But this particular juror was the only one to vote against the death penalty. So Berry was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Despite the forensic evidence, Berry still says he's innocent.
I've been trying unsuccessfully, filing appeals and trying to get back in court. And I figured it couldn't hurt. You know, it may generate some publicity and help me in some way.
I say you're a liar. There's no question about it, because of all the types of scientific evidence out there, this evidence is irrefutable that Thomas Berry encountered Janet Sicleri on the night of August the 28th. There's no question about it. That we proved beyond all doubt instead of beyond a reasonable doubt. And if Mr. Berry says that, he's a liar.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Derek Severs and his wife Eileen, who are in their 60s,
half away from the home of Derek and Eileen Severs, who disappeared about 3 weeks ago.
Resume their search for Derek and Eileen Severs, who vanished without trace from their home in Hambleton.
Despite a detailed search for a missing couple by police and hundreds of volunteers, it was the information found in some dirt which led police to their whereabouts. Derek and Eileen Severs were a wealthy retired couple who lived a life of English leisure in Hambleton, a small village about a 2-hour drive from London. The village sits on a narrow peninsula that juts out into Rutland Water, one of Europe's largest man-made lakes. The woods and the lake make it a popular vacation destination, and the Severs had been living here for the past 20 years in a home known locally as the Bungalow. Derek Severs had been retired for the past few years and was well known and well liked among neighbors of the small village. Doug Clements lived next door to the Severs.
I'd never met a better man than Derek Severs. He liked a bit of horse racing and he loved a pint of beer.
Derek's wife Eileen was equally well known, not only as a volunteer for many local charities, but also as a kind and generous friend and neighbor.
Mrs. Severs was one of those people who spent all her time visiting people, doing things for charity. She was always seen, everybody liked her.
Saturday afternoon, November 13th, 1993, was the last time friends saw Derek Severs. He was having lunch and a few pints of ale here at the Finch's Arms pub. Friends said Derek left the pub around 3:30 that afternoon, got into his car, and was headed straight home. Eileen Severs was last seen on that same afternoon. She left this church after attending a charity bazaar she helped organize. Eileen told friends she too was headed home. 5 days later, after the Severs both missed some previously scheduled appointments, friends called the police.
This is the sort of place where if you're missing for a couple of hours, people want to know why.
Police immediately drove out to the Severs' home. The missing couple's 37-year-old son, Roger, answered the door.
Derek and Eileen Severs?
Well, Mum and Dad are on holiday in London.
Would you mind if I had a look around then?
Police took a quick look around the house.
There's no sign of a break-in. There's no sign of anything wrong inside the house.
By which you mean there's no sign of a struggle or anything?
No, there's nothing at all.
But friends weren't convinced that everything was all right. The Severs had never gone away without first canceling their scheduled appointments.
They weren't the sort of couple who would disappear without telling friends. They would always say, well, look, we're popping out, look after our house, because that's the sort of village that it was.
He used to leave me in charge. He'd say he'd look after the garden.
And neighbors said it was unusual for Derek and Eileen Severs to ask their son Roger to house sit. Roger was a disappointment to his parents. He was unemployed and had the reputation of being a con man, once telling a girlfriend that he was a gynecologist. When police heard these stories, they decided to take a closer look around the Severs home. 6 days after friends last saw Derek and Eileen Severs, the police decided to make a second visit to the Severs home, this time in daylight. The officers noticed that the backyard had recently been excavated, and there were signs of a fire in the garden.
And looking through the windows, we could see this kitchen carpet was missing, but it didn't add up. So we decided that we'd use the police powers to go into the bungalow to have a further search.
Roger Severs told police that his parents left for London from the Peterborough train station. Police went to the train station with a photograph of the Severs. They asked the employees and regular passengers if they had seen the couple.
Mr. Severs was this very big man who walked very badly with the aid of a stick, and we thought that if anybody had seen them, they would remember them.
But no one at the train station recalled seeing the Severs, and police found no evidence they even made it to London. Already local newspapers ran headlines about the Severs' mysterious disappearance. The police suspected foul play and decided to conduct a forensic search for blood inside the Severs' home. Detectives noticed some suspicious dark stains on the side of the bathtub and performed a Kastle-Meyer test. A damp cotton swab is used to wipe the stain, and then some phenolphthalein and hydrogen peroxide are added. The sample of the stain found on the bathtub turned a bright pink, a positive presumptive test for the presence of blood.
The fact we'd found blood didn't necessarily prove conclusively that it come from a violent action. They could have, one of them could have cut themselves in the bathroom. Anything could have happened.
Police also noticed a blood smear on the back seat of Derek Severs' automobile, and the Kastle-Meyer test confirmed that stains on the garage door were indeed blood spatter. Police noticed something else that was suspicious. They found a large number of green fibers in the hallway inside the house, in the trunk of Mr. Severs' automobile, and on a pair of trousers believed to be Roger's. The fibers were an important clue because they did not match any items inside the house. This was an indication that the source of the fibers had recently been removed.
The actual item itself was missing, so that if as were the two Severs, Mr. and Mrs. Severs, so logic tells you that it's gone with the two, it's part of the crime scene.
The police were convinced that the Severs had been the victims of foul play and suspected that Roger Severs knew more about his parents' whereabouts than he was telling them. Investigators believed that Roger Severs was involved with his parents' disappearance, but they had no proof that a crime had been committed and had no hard evidence suggesting where their bodies might be. The search for the Severs began in their own backyard, since it appeared that the gardens had recently been excavated and there had also been some kind of fire.
You'd need a very, very big fire to dispose of bodies, and there's no way they could have been disposed of on there.
The police didn't find any human remains, but they did find small bits of carpet and clothing in the ashes.
It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, because all around there is rural. There's a huge expanse of water, lots of forests, trees, woods, open fields. How on earth do you find a body there?
Just when all of these searches turned up no clues, police finally got a break. They learned of a strange event which occurred before the Severs were even reported missing. A police officer on patrol recalled seeing a man in an isolated area called the Exton Avenue Woods.
Is there something wrong, sir?
The man matched Roger Severs' description.
I just needed to relieve myself, and then I decided to gather some leaf bulbs in the garden.
The officer said the man acted suspiciously.
Well, any gardener, any horticulturist will tell you don't want leaf mould at the end of in November. It's not the time of the year you're going to collect it, and certainly not at 6:30 at night. So we assumed something had occurred up in the Exton Avenue Woods there, so off we went to have a look.
When they returned to the area a few days later, they found a bloody towel near the spot where the man was seen collecting leaves. But the police could find no evidence that the bodies were buried there.
We did a fingertip search of the entire area, and we never ever recovered any further evidence from that scene.
The towel matched those in the Severs house. But without blood samples for Mr. and Mrs. Severs, it was difficult to know to whom the blood belonged.
It was challenging rather than frustrating. We wanted to find the bodies for two reasons. One, evidential, obviously. And secondly, of course, I think it's only right and proper if there's been a murder, we want the bodies for the relatives and everyone else.
Late one night, Inspector Palmer studied the photographs of the Severs automobile. As he flipped through the photographs, something unusual caught his eye. Something suspicious about the dirt and mud on Mr. Severs' car. The color of the mud just didn't look right.
This staining was a lot lighter in colour than you would expect from a vehicle on road usage. Generally speaking, a vehicle on road usage, it's a very dark, black, dark grey, dirty colour. This was a lot lighter colour.
Was it possible that an analysis of the dried mud on the car might give police some idea of where the car had been? To find out, detectives called in Dr. Tony Brown, a geologist at the University of Exeter. Dr. Brown began his examination by collecting the soil, dirt, grass, and debris from the wheel wells of Derek Severs' automobile. Under a microscope, Dr. Brown analyzed the samples and discovered tiny bits of vegetation mixed in with the mud, including minute pieces of moss, leaves, and grass. There was even a small piece of fishing line.
It told us that it was a mixed deciduous woodland, probably oak-dominated, but with also several other species. It was clearly quite shady. The moss could only come from a little shaded woodland. And there was also a fair amount of grass. And at first that might seem to contradict the woodland, but that's likely to occur either at the edge of a clearing in a woodland or towards the edge of a woodland. And of course the fishing line suggested it was somewhere that fishermen parked.
And Dr. Brown discovered another microscopic clue. More than 20 different types of pollen were mixed in with the mud from the wheel well. To identify the pollen, Dr. Brown needed to isolate the microscopic pollen granules from the soil. First, by using a series of filters, and then by adding hydrofluoric acid, a chemical so powerful it can dissolve glass. The acid dissolves away all remaining materials, leaving just the pollen. Dr. Brown was able to identify most of the pollen in the sample. Oak, elm, and pollen from hawthorns were easy to identify just by sight. However, he noticed one type of pollen he had never seen before.
I knew that I didn't know what it was, and then after that, of course, we run through the normal process of identifying an unknown pollen type.
There are millions of different species of pollen. Dr. Brown looked closely at the number and placement of the tiny slits and compared them to the thousands of photographs of pollen samples in his library. Dr. Brown found a match. The pollen was from an unusual specimen, from a tree not terribly common in England. It was pollen from a horse chestnut tree, a tree native to Asia.
In my whole career of looking at samples from the East Midlands, I'd never actually seen horse chestnut pollen from a sample.
And there was something else unusual about the pollen from the horse chestnut tree. It's a heavy pollen, and because of its weight, it's too heavy to travel far through the air. It tends to float straight down to the ground, very close to the tree itself. Since Dr. Brown found horse chestnut pollen in all 4 of the rover's wheel arches, he was convinced that the car had recently been parked near a horse chestnut tree.
This area was sort of a shark tank for predators, not just the Green River Killer, but others.
In Who Took Misty Copsey, I'm investigating the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who vanished from the Washington State Fair in 1992.
How? Why? She was so sweet and so young. What happened to her?
Listen to Who Took Misty Copsey, wherever you get your podcasts.
Police asked Dr. Brown to identify possible locations that had horse chestnut trees, as well as other vegetation matching the samples found in the Severs wheel wells. Dr. Brown identified 5 possible locations to search. The first woodland searched was this one, the closest to the Severs home, but an entire day of looking here turned up nothing. Next, they searched the second area Dr. Brown identified, a larger woodland near the lake. Specially trained search teams worked their way down this hill. When an officer poked a stick into one of the mounds, he found it to be unexpectedly soft. He cleared away some leaves and loose soil to reveal a patch of human skin. Police slowly uncovered the bodies of Eileen and Derek Severs. Ironically, they were found lying on a bed of horse chestnuts. Just a few feet away stood a horse chestnut tree.
They were lying side by side, and both of them were wrapped in green blankets.
Fibers in the green blanket matched the green fibers found in the Severs hallway and on the trousers that belonged to Roger Severs. The top layer of leaves and soil was similar to the soil found at the Exton Avenue woods, where Roger Severs had been seen by police. Another layer of soil matched the soil in the Severs' backyard. There was even a layer of roof tiles to stabilize the grave. The tiles matched the roof tiles on the Severs home.
Roger was then tied into every step of the progression from the murder to the burial.
All of the evidence pointed to the Severs' only son, Roger, who had a history of personal and financial difficulties.
He was basically penniless, certainly hard up. And we believe that he had turned up at the bungalow and maybe for the first time, we don't know, had been refused help by his parents.
What do you mean too much?
On Saturday afternoon, November 13th, while his father was at the pub, Roger argued with his mother in the kitchen. He followed her to the bathroom and attacked, striking her 8 times to the head, causing the blood spatter found on the bathtub. Roger then wrapped his mother's body in a green blanket, dragged her body to the kitchen, leaving a trail of green fibers found in the hallway and on Roger's trousers. Derek Severs arrived home shortly afterwards, and when he did, Roger was waiting. He struck his father 10 times in the head, causing the blood spatter onto the garage door. Roger placed his father's body into the back seat of the car, where police later noticed the blood smear, and he put his mother's body in the trunk, where green blanket fibers were later discovered. Roger drove his father's car to a deserted location in the woods, parked under a horse chestnut tree in an area used by fishermen, and then dragged the bodies into the woods. Roger wanted to limit the time he spent at the scene. So instead of digging a grave, he placed the bodies into a ravine and covered them with roofing tiles, fertilizer, and leaves. But the most important piece of evidence came as Roger was driving away. Pollen from the nearby horse chestnut tree flew up into the wheel wells of the automobile. Roger Severs could never have imagined that this pollen would lead police to his parents' grave. Roger Severs was charged in the murder of his parents, and during the trial, took the witness stand and confessed. His plea for leniency failed, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
The wife and I, we lost two good friends, and life's never been the same since.
I embarked on something which I saw as being rather simplistic, link this vehicle with those man-made roads. That was all I wanted. I got a lot more, and hopefully that's going to help a lot of people, investigators in the future.
Well, I think that the police now are certainly far more aware of the value of what otherwise might just be described as mud.